On the rainy evening of September 4, 2007, in Birmingham, Alabama, 46-year-old social worker Linda Harris was finishing dinner in her small apartment when a knock at the door interrupted her quiet night. She wasn't expecting company. When she opened the door, she was face to face with Monique Carter, a woman she hadn't seen in nearly 6 years, and the last person she expected to see standing there with a smile. Their history was complicated. In 2001, Linda had been assigned as a caseworker in a custody dispute involving Monique's young son. The investigation, sparked by reports of neglect and abuse, ultimately led to Monique losing custody. Her son was placed in foster care, then adopted by another family. In Monique's eyes, Linda wasn't just a government employee doing her job. She was the enemy, the one who had stolen her child. Over the years, Monique's resentment grew into an obsession. Friends later told investigators that she spoke of Linda frequently, calling her the root of all my pain, and vowing to make her feel what I feel. She kept old court documents, adoption papers, and even a grainy photograph of Linda clipped from a newspaper article. But what transforms a grievance into a years-long vendetta? How does anger ferment into the kind of cold patience required for revenge? By 2006, Monique's life had spiraled further. She cycled through unstable jobs, was evicted twice, and had several minor arrests for disorderly conduct. During a short jail stint, she reportedly told a cellmate that she was saving her strength for the day she'd even the score with Linda. Her opportunity came in late summer 2007, when she learned through a mutual acquaintance that Linda had moved into a new apartment complex with minimal security. Over the next 2 weeks, Monique made several unobserved visits to the area, parking a few blocks away and walking past the building to memorize entry points and stairwell access. On September 4th, she arrived prepared. Hidden inside her large purse was a chef's knife with an 8-inch blade, a roll of duct tape, and a pair of latex gloves. She timed her arrival for just after sunset, when Linda was likely to be home but before the building's common areas would be busy. When Linda answered the knock, she hesitated upon seeing Monique. Witnesses in neighboring units later testified to hearing muffled voices, then the sound of a door shutting. Monique had convinced Linda to let her in, under what pretense remains unclear, though investigators believe she may have mentioned wanting to clear the air. Once inside, the conversation quickly soured. Monique confronted Linda about the custody loss, accusing her of fabricating evidence and siding against her. Linda, by all accounts, remained calm, explaining that the court's decision had been based on documented findings. That answer only seemed to ignite Monique's fury. The attack was sudden and frenzied. Monique struck Linda across the face with the blunt end of the knife handle before plunging the blade into her abdomen. As Linda collapsed, Monique used the duct tape to bind her hands, ensuring she couldn't fight back. The medical examiner later testified that Linda suffered over 20 stab wounds, many inflicted while she was already incapacitated. After the killing, Monique didn't flee immediately. She spent nearly half an hour in the apartment, rifling through drawers and closets, taking personal items. A framed photo of Linda with her own children, a bracelet, and Linda's caseworker ID badge. Detectives later interpreted these as trophies, meant to prolong the satisfaction of her revenge. Monique finally left around 9 p.m., slipping out through a rear stairwell. But she made a critical mistake. A building security camera, recently installed after a string of thefts, captured her entering and exiting. While the footage was grainy, her distinctive braided hairstyle and the patterned scarf she wore were identifiable. When police brought Monique in for questioning 2 days later, she denied everything, claiming she hadn't seen Linda in years. But confronted with the footage, witness statements, and the discovery of the stolen bracelet in her apartment, she changed her story. She admitted being there but claimed the stabbing was self-defense, alleging Linda attacked her first. Forensic evidence, however, showed no signs of struggle consistent with her claim, and the bindings on Linda's wrists told a different story. The trial began in March 2008 and lasted just over 2 weeks. The prosecution argued that Monique's actions were the result of long-term premeditation, citing her documented threats, her surveillance of Linda's building, and the items she brought on the night of the murder. They called it revenge at its purest and most poisonous form. The defense leaned heavily on Monique's troubled background, painting her as a grieving mother pushed beyond her limits. But jurors were unmoved by emotional appeals when confronted with the calculated nature of the attack. On April 3, 2008, Monique Carter was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The judge's words were pointed: "You did not act in the heat of passion. You acted with a cold heart and a clear plan, and you carried it out without hesitation." In prison, Monique remains a solitary figure. She rarely speaks to other inmates and spends much of her time writing in notebooks she refuses to let anyone read. Some speculate she's chronicling her version of events, perhaps still clinging to the belief that she was justified. For Linda's family, the loss was devastating. Her sister described her as the kind of person who would take abuse in silence if it meant protecting others. The idea that she opened her door to someone she once tried to help, only to be met with fatal violence, remains a wound that time has yet to close. And while Monique's crime was rooted in deeply personal revenge, our next case returns us to the world of calculated greed, where the killer's ambition wasn't for emotional closure, but for control over a criminal empire she was willing to kill to inherit. On the humid night of July 26, 1998, in the heart of New Orleans, Louisiana, police were called to a modest shotgun-style house in the Treme neighborhood. Inside, they found 56-year-old Gloria Mama G. Duval slumped over her kitchen table, a single gunshot wound to the head. Her death sent ripples through the city's underworld. Mama G was no ordinary victim. She was a quiet but powerful figure in the local gambling and numbers-running circuit, respected and feared in equal measure. The shock grew when the primary suspect emerged, Tasha Lil T. Duval, her 30-year-old niece and protégé. For over a decade, Tasha had been at Mama G's side, learning the business, running collections, and enforcing debts. To outsiders, she was the heir apparent, the woman who would keep the family's illicit operations running for another generation. But for Tasha, that future wasn't coming fast enough. By mid-1998, tensions between aunt and niece had begun to surface. Mama G, cautious by nature, resisted expanding into more lucrative but riskier drug trafficking. Tasha, ambitious and hungry for more money, grew frustrated. She believed her aunt's reluctance was costing them millions. Friends recalled her saying, "She's holding me back. If I had the reins, we'd be untouchable." But what turns ambition into patricide of a criminal kind? How does a protégé decide to eliminate the very person who made her powerful? According to prosecutors, Tasha began quietly plotting her takeover months in advance. She cultivated alliances among Mama G's lieutenants, promising bigger cuts if they backed her. She also started handling more cash collections herself, subtly testing her ability to manage the network without her aunt's oversight. On the night of the murder, Tasha arrived at Mama G's house with a bottle of top-shelf bourbon, a peace offering after a public argument days earlier. The two women sat at the kitchen table, drinking and talking. But at some point, conversation turned to business and tensions flared again. Witnesses later reported hearing raised voices from the house. Then a single gunshot broke the humid silence. The medical examiner determined Mama G was shot at close range with a .38 revolver, the bullet entering just above her left eyebrow. There were no signs of forced entry, no theft of valuables. The cash box and ledgers in her office remained untouched. That suggested the killer wasn't after quick money, but something far more valuable: control. Detectives initially hit a wall. Mama G's reputation meant there were plenty of potential enemies. But suspicions hardened around Tasha when investigators learned she had quietly met with several of Mama G's business contacts in the days after the killing, presenting herself as the new decision-maker. One associate described her as calm, almost cheerful, as she promised changes and expansion plans. The breakthrough came when a .38 revolver matching the murder weapon was found in a storm drain 2 blocks from Tasha's apartment. Ballistics matched it to the bullet taken from Mama G's skull. While there were no fingerprints, fibers from Tasha's distinctive leopard print jacket were found in the revolver's grip, trapped under a piece of tape she'd wrapped around it for better hold. When confronted, Tasha denied everything, claiming she'd been at a friend's house all night. But cell phone records placed her in the Treme neighborhood within minutes of the shooting. One of Mama G's longtime lieutenants, fearing for his own safety, eventually told police that Tasha had approached him weeks earlier, asking if he knew anyone who could handle a close-range job. The trial in 1999 was a spectacle. Part criminal prosecution, part soap opera. The prosecution painted Tasha as a power-hungry opportunist who wanted the crown without earning it. They introduced testimony from associates who said she'd spoken openly about running the whole show and making the old ways disappear. They also presented forensic evidence linking her to the gun and the scene. The defense countered by pointing to the volatile nature of Mama G's business. They argued that any number of rivals could have committed the murder and that the case against Tasha was built on circumstantial evidence and the word of self-interested criminals. Tasha herself took the stand, delivering calm, measured answers, even as the prosecution confronted her with inconsistencies. The jury deliberated for just over a day before finding Tasha Lil T. Duval guilty of second-degree murder and racketeering. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the years since, she has given a handful of interviews, portraying herself as a loyal niece framed by jealous rivals. But those who knew the inner workings of Mama G's empire believe the truth is far simpler. Tasha wanted it all, and she was willing to kill to get it. After her death, Mama G's organization fractured. Without her steady hand, and with Tasha behind bars, the network splintered into smaller crews, many of which were swallowed up by larger gangs. Law enforcement used the chaos to make arrests and seize assets, effectively ending the Duval family's reign. For the people of Treme, the murder was a turning point, marking the end of an era. Mama G's funeral drew hundreds, from grieving relatives to former rivals who came to pay respects to a woman they'd fought but never underestimated. As for Tasha, she remains in the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, a cautionary tale about how unchecked ambition can devour even the closest bonds. And while Tasha's crime was fueled by greed and the lure of power, our next case will take us back to a motive as old as humanity itself, jealousy, and the tragic cost when envy transforms into an unstoppable rage. On the warm summer evening of August 15, 2012, in Richmond, Virginia, 26-year-old elementary school teacher Jasmine Clark was grading papers at her kitchen table, the hum of a box fan filling the small apartment. She didn't notice the faint creak of the door until it was too late. Moments later, she lay bleeding on the linoleum floor, the victim of a brutal attack carried out by Sierra Rhea Maddox, a 29-year-old woman consumed by jealousy. Jasmine had never met Rhea before that night, but she knew of her. Rhea was the longtime girlfriend of Marcus Howard, a man Jasmine had been casually dating for 2 months. To Jasmine, Marcus was single. To Rhea, Marcus was hers, and no one else had the right to him. Friends of Rhea would later tell investigators she had been suspicious for weeks, checking Marcus's phone, following him after work, and interrogating mutual acquaintances. The breaking point came when Rhea intercepted a text from Jasmine to Marcus about meeting for dinner. The message was innocent enough, but for Rhea, it was confirmation of betrayal. That same night, she told a friend, "She's about to learn not to touch what's mine." But what turns romantic jealousy into murderous intent? How does the fear of losing someone drive a person to end another's life? The days leading up to the murder were filled with signs of escalation. Rhea began stalking Jasmine, following her from school to the grocery store, parking near her apartment complex late at night, even creating fake social media profiles to monitor her posts. She learned Jasmine's schedule down to the hour, noting when she left for work, when she returned, and when she was most likely to be alone. On August 15th, Rhea waited until Marcus was at work before putting her plan into motion. She packed a kitchen knife with a 6-inch blade into her purse, along with a pair of gloves and a change of clothes. At around 7:30 p.m., she drove to Jasmine's apartment building, parking on the far side of the lot to avoid security cameras. Witnesses later recalled seeing her walking quickly toward the building, head down, hood pulled over her hair despite the summer heat. Rhea knocked on Jasmine's door. When Jasmine opened it, she reportedly asked, "Can I help you?" According to prosecutors, Rhea responded by forcing her way inside and shoving Jasmine backward. The two women struggled, knocking over a chair and scattering papers across the floor. Rhea slashed at Jasmine's arms and hands as she tried to defend herself, then plunged the knife into her chest twice. Jasmine collapsed, gasping for air, while Rhea stood over her. Rather than fleeing immediately, Rhea paused to grab Jasmine's phone from the table and scroll through it, later telling police she wanted to see what else she'd been saying to Marcus. She then dropped the phone on the floor, stepped over the dying woman, and left through the front door. A neighbor, hearing the commotion, called 911. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Jasmine was pronounced dead at the scene. Detectives quickly connected Rhea to the killing. Marcus, when questioned, admitted to dating Jasmine but claimed he had not told Rhea about it. He also revealed that Rhea had a history of confrontations with other women he'd spoken to, though none had turned violent before. The key evidence came from building security footage, which showed Rhea entering and leaving the apartment complex around the time of the murder. Investigators also recovered a pair of gloves from a dumpster behind her apartment building, both stained with Jasmine's blood. DNA tests confirmed the match. When confronted, Rhea initially denied being anywhere near Jasmine's home. But when shown the footage, she claimed she had gone there only to talk, and that the stabbing was self-defense after Jasmine attacked her. The forensic evidence told another story. The defensive wounds were on Jasmine, not Rhea, and the angle of the fatal stab wounds indicated an aggressive attack rather than a defensive struggle. The trial began in May 2013 and drew intense public interest, with media outlets portraying it as a love triangle turned deadly. The prosecution argued that Ria's actions were premeditated, pointing to her stalking behavior, the items she brought with her, and the methodical way she approached the apartment. They framed her as a woman who viewed Marcus as property and Jasmine as an obstacle to be removed. The defense tried to cast doubt on the timeline and argued that the killing was a heat-of-the-moment confrontation gone wrong. They called character witnesses to describe Ria as devoted and protective, but under cross-examination, those same witnesses admitted she could also be controlling and volatile. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before finding Ria guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In his sentencing remarks, the judge noted, "Jealousy may be a common emotion, but what you did was anything but common. It was calculated, cruel, and irreversible." In prison, Ria has shown little remorse. In a recorded phone call to a friend, she reportedly said, she knew what she was getting into. She should have stayed away from him. To Jasmine's family, those words are proof that Ria still justifies the killing in her own mind. Jasmine's colleagues at the school where she taught organized a memorial scholarship in her name, honoring her dedication to education and her students. Each year, they gather in the school library to remember her, telling stories of her kindness and patience, the qualities that made her a beloved teacher and friend. And while jealousy was the poison that drove Ria Maddox to kill, our next case will explore a different kind of darkness, where the killer's motive wasn't emotional or financial, but the chilling desire to eliminate anyone who stood in the way of her climb to political influence. On the chilly night of November 3, 2004, in Jackson, Mississippi, the city's political circles were buzzing. Election season had just wrapped up, and celebrations were in full swing. But in a quiet cul-de-sac on the outskirts of town, a very different kind of gathering was taking place, one that would end in bloodshed and scandal. The victim was 52-year-old Denise Caldwell, a beloved community activist and mentor to many young women in the local political scene. Her killer, Rochelle Shelley Whitaker, a 33-year-old rising political aide whose charm and networking skills had put her on the fast track to influence. Denise had been instrumental in introducing Rochelle to powerful figures in city government, helping her secure her first job as a legislative assistant. The two women shared a public image of mutual respect and collaboration. Behind closed doors, however, tensions had been growing. Denise, known for her moral compass, had recently confronted Rochelle about rumors of unethical dealings, campaign fund mismanagement, favors traded for influence, and promises made to shady business donors. According to one mutual acquaintance, Denise warned Rochelle that if she didn't straighten out, doors will start closing for you. For someone as ambitious as Rochelle, that wasn't just a warning, it was a threat to her entire future. But what drives a protégé to silence her mentor forever? How far will ambition stretch before it snaps into violence? In the weeks before the murder, Rochelle began quietly distancing herself from Denise in public, while privately gathering information about her routines. She learned that Denise often worked late at her home office, and that she lived alone since her husband's passing. Rochelle also knew the back door to Denise's home was rarely locked when she was expecting visitors. On November 3, under the cover of evening, Rochelle drove to Denise's home after attending a political reception. She parked her car several streets away and walked the remaining distance, carrying a leather tote bag with a weighted metal candlestick inside, a gift Denise had once given her, now turned into a weapon. Denise, likely thinking Rochelle was dropping by to reconcile after weeks of tension, welcomed her inside. The two sat in the living room, exchanging small talk before the conversation inevitably turned to politics. Rochelle, according to her later confession, brought up the possibility of a new campaign position she wanted, one that Denise controlled the recommendation for. Denise hesitated, reminding Rochelle that trust and integrity mattered as much as skill. The moment hardened into confrontation. Rochelle accused Denise of holding her back and playing gatekeeper. Denise stood to end the conversation, but Rochelle followed her into the kitchen, candlestick in hand. The first blow landed on the back of Denise's head, dropping her to the tile floor. Rochelle struck again, and again, until Denise stopped moving. The coroner would later count at least 7 separate impacts, each delivered with significant force. After the killing, Rochelle attempted to stage a burglary. She opened several drawers, scattered papers across the desk, and removed a small jewelry box. She also took Denise's laptop, thinking it might contain sensitive political contacts or correspondence she could use later. By morning, the news of Denise's death spread through Jackson like wildfire. The city was stunned, a community leader gone with no clear suspect. But suspicion began to creep toward Rochelle almost immediately. Several colleagues noted she was unusually composed when informed of Denise's death, even making comments about how politics gets ugly sometimes. The investigation picked up speed when police reviewed traffic camera footage from a nearby intersection. It showed Rochelle's car turning into Denise's neighborhood on the night of the murder and leaving roughly 40 minutes later. Additionally, a neighbor reported seeing a woman matching Rochelle's description walking toward Denise's house that night. When detectives interviewed Rochelle, she denied visiting Denise that evening. But inconsistencies in her timeline, and the discovery of the missing jewelry box in her apartment, began to unravel her story. Forensic analysis revealed traces of Denise's blood on the inside lining of Rochelle's tote bag, despite her claim that she hadn't been near the scene. The trial in 2006 became one of the most talked about cases in Mississippi's political history. Prosecutors described Rochelle as a woman willing to trade a life for a recommendation, framing the murder as a calculated move to remove an obstacle. They highlighted the irony of using a gift from Denise as the murder weapon, a symbol of their once close relationship turned into an instrument of betrayal. The defense attempted to portray the killing as a heat-of-the-moment argument that spiraled out of control, not premeditated murder. But jurors were swayed by the evidence of planning: the parked car far from the scene, the concealed weapon, and the staged burglary. After 3 days of deliberation, Rochelle Whitaker was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The judge called the act an assassination in the truest sense: personal, planned, and political. From prison, Rochelle has given occasional interviews, often attempting to minimize her role or shift blame onto the toxic nature of politics. She insists she snapped under pressure, though she has never explained why she brought a heavy candlestick to a late-night visit with her mentor. For those who knew Denise, the loss is still raw. Annual charity events she once organized now serve as memorial fundraisers in her name, supporting young women entering public service, a legacy Rochelle can never touch. And while Rochelle's story is one of ambition gone violently wrong, our final case will take us into a realm where the killer's motives defy even those dark standards. A case where murder wasn't about gain, jealousy, or revenge, but about fulfilling a disturbing personal ideology. On the cold evening of February 9, 2018, in St. Louis, Missouri, 34-year-old civil rights volunteer Angela Matthews was locking up the community center after a long day. She was known for her tireless work helping at-risk youth, running food drives, and organizing literacy programs. But in the parking lot, a figure waited: Kendra K. Willis, a 27-year-old former mentee whose life Angela had once fought to turn around. Years earlier, Kendra had been a troubled teenager, bouncing between juvenile detention and group homes. Angela had taken her under her wing, helping her get a GED, connecting her with job programs, and even letting her stay in her own apartment for a time. To Angela, it was an investment in hope. To Kendra, it was something more: the beginning of an ideology she believed she could perfect. Kendra had developed a warped worldview during her years on the streets, blending radical conspiracy theories, extremist manifestos, and her own conviction that weakness in the community had to be purged. She saw herself as a soldier in a self-declared war to remove the obstacles to a stronger people, a mission she later told detectives Angela wouldn't get behind. But what turns a misguided belief into the justification for murder? How does a personal ideology become a death sentence for those who oppose it? By late 2017, Kendra had started pushing Angela to endorse her plans, which included pressuring teens in the community center to join a discipline program involving isolation, physical drills, and expelling those who resisted. Angela, horrified, shut her down, telling her, "We're here to help people, not break them." Kendra saw this as betrayal. In her mind, Angela had gone from mentor to obstacle, someone who stood in the way of the mission. Kendra began following Angela's schedule, noting when she worked late and when the center was empty. She purchased a large hunting knife from a sporting goods store, telling the clerk it was for protection, and started wearing gloves even indoors. She later admitted this was to practice for the night. On February 9th, Angela stayed late to finish paperwork. Around 9:15 p.m., Kendra entered through the rear door, which she knew Angela often left unlocked for trusted volunteers. Angela reportedly greeted her with surprise, saying she hadn't expected her that night. Kendra replied, "I'm here for the truth," before pulling the knife from her coat pocket. What followed was quick but vicious. Angela attempted to run toward the front entrance, but Kendra caught her near the storage room. She stabbed her 3 times in the abdomen, then once in the chest. Forensic evidence later showed that Angela tried to fight back. Defensive wounds marked her forearms and hands, but she was overpowered. Rather than fleeing immediately, Kendra took Angela's keys, locked the front door from the inside, and sat down in one of the plastic folding chairs. In her later confession, she described this moment as the calm after the purge, claiming she felt peace knowing the mission was back on track. It was a janitor arriving for his night shift who found Angela's body just before 10 p.m. He called 911, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. Detectives quickly noted there were no signs of robbery. Angela's wallet, phone, and jewelry were untouched. The brutality and the lack of theft pointed to a personal motive. Security footage from inside the center sealed Kendra's fate. Cameras captured her entering through the back, approaching Angela, and the first seconds of the attack before the two moved out of frame. Later footage showed her sitting calmly in the chair, hands resting on the knife in her lap, before leaving through the back door. Police arrested her at her apartment less than 12 hours later. In interrogation, Kendra spoke freely, explaining her ideology in chilling detail. She referred to Angela's murder as necessary and merciful to the cause. She expressed no remorse, only frustration that she had wasted years thinking she could be converted. The trial in 2019 was harrowing. Prosecutors portrayed Kendra as an extremist whose beliefs had twisted into delusion and violence. They read from her journals, filled with rants about weeding out the weak and eliminating traitors from within. They showed how her ideology had become a justification for violence against anyone who opposed her, including the woman who had once saved her life. The defense argued she was mentally ill and unable to fully grasp the consequences of her actions. But psychiatric evaluations concluded she was competent to stand trial and understood right from wrong. She simply believed her mission outweighed the law. After only 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, calling her ideology a poison that consumed the mind and destroyed the soul. In prison, Kendra remains isolated, partly for her own protection and partly because she continues to espouse her violent beliefs to anyone who will listen. She spends hours writing letters to extremist groups, though most are intercepted by prison staff. For Angela's friends and family, the tragedy lies not just in her death but in the irony that she died helping the very person who killed her. Her colleagues at the community center renamed their youth scholarship in her honor, vowing to continue her mission of compassion and opportunity. And so, our journey through America's most notorious black female killers ends here, with a case that shows murder doesn't always spring from greed, passion, or revenge. Sometimes, it's born from the most dangerous belief of all, that killing is not just acceptable but righteous.